So like our mission and vision has not changed, will never change. Like we exist because we have a purpose and we feel like that purpose brings a lot of value to the people that I care about and like the people that the company cares about, which are architects. So that will not change. What has been like a thing that happened throughout the last 2 years is the same thing that we preach also. Like there's a lot of turbulence in the financial markets
Hmm.
that impacts small businesses like architects, but they also impact like venture-backed businesses like ours. So you have to acknowledge that the markets are tough and you have to make some like really tough decisions and manage your finances appropriately. We've done a really, really good job here. We still have a large war chest of cash. And we're just going to be continue to be really thoughtful in how we use it to make sure that we can continue to build and drive progress. So it has not been easy because like when markets are good, like well, markets are good. Uh, when markets are bad, well, that means like you gotta like hire slower. You have to watch your money a lot more carefully. You have to be very thoughtful of like what your revenue forecasts look like. And you have to make some tough decisions on like where to invest and where not to invest. And those are hard. Those are really hard decisions.
Do you think that for yourself, because you've gone through this whole monograph journey, that you have a much
Mm.
better understanding of the gap between a lot of architecture offices and their finances? So that kind of, assumes that there's a little bit of a schism between how most architects practice and maybe what they and their finances, and they're maybe not tracking it as well. Do you think that because of your personal experience that you are able to understand that space better?
Yeah, like because like it's really weird, right? Like before I started Monograph, my job was to design a building. That was
Hmm.
my job. Now my job is to make sure the business that I'm building doesn't die. Uh,
Yeah.
but like
Put it bluntly,
it's a
yeah.
very
Yeah.
it's a obviously I want to grow the business, but at the same time, part of my job is to make sure that it doesn't die.
Yeah.
Like so, I have a fiducial responsibility to running a business. I was like, holy cow, like I'm trained as an architect. Uh,
Yeah.
I I did not learn how to do that in school. I did not learn how to do that in practice, and I had to learn on the job while building Monograph. So like I am probably much more equipped today than I was ever. I also feel like because I still value and because of the product that we build, I can translate a lot of that learning into the product. I can translate a lot of that learnings into like my thoughts in terms of how businesses should be run.
Hmm.
Uh, and hopefully that helps some people out there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. Like, I kind of imagine there must be days or moments when you are thinking about Monograph itself, and then you realize this actually is an interesting or important subject that architects should also be thinking about, or an important question that architecture offices should be asking themselves.
Yeah. I mean, let's
It-
face it, it's nothing exciting, thinking about the financial aspect. No, but let's be honest, when you're creative, like you want to create, you want to think about the sexy stuff, like the fun
Right.
and design aspect of the business.
mm,
And looking at the numbers, it's not fun if you don't like numbers to start with. And, if you're again trying to make the business survive, it's even harder to look at those numbers because they're not going to bring you joy,
Right, right.
you know?
yeah, I think that's also the wrong way to look at it,
Yeah.
at least for me. Um, I think if you try to solve the problem by trying to pretend like you're an accountant, you will fail at the job
Hmm.
because you're not trained as an accountant. I am not trained as an accountant. If I try to mold myself to behave like an accountant, I will probably fail. What I am is I'm his like I am trained as an architect. I was an architect. I like to solve problems creatively. So if I'm gonna look and run at the business, I need to also like inherently understand where my strengths are and where my weaknesses are. I will not try to run the business like an accountant. What I will though is, and what actually motivates me all the time is I like frameworks. I like
Frameworks.
I like I like systems. I like framework systems, philosophies. I like methodologies. because I use them in design. So like I can apply the same way of thinking towards business. But that just means like the outcome's the same, but like the how you start is very different.
How long has Monograph been around for now?
We are now about 4.5 years.
It's awesome. You must have seen a handful of offices that who have grown with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
What is that like to see for you?
Oh, incredible. Oh my God, it's incredible. Like to not fully take credit, but to say that I had a hand in making a small business a more successful business is incredibly empowering. It reminds me of why I do what I do. So it holy shit, like it's an incredible feeling.
The other thing too is, as I think I've said before the last times we spoke with you, because of your position, you have access to a lot of interesting information and a unique perspective, because you kind of you get exposed to a lot of architecture offices because they use the platform, but also you guys do a lot of events, you do things like this, you're very much engaged in the community and you're part of the architecture discourse. So with that perspective that you have, are there maybe like the top 3 things that you see that architecture offices don't do but you feel they should be doing, in terms of management of the office, finances, time tracking, all that kind of space?
Yeah.
Aside from signing up for Monograph, which sounds like I just t-balled that one up, but aside from that,
That's a really, really good question. What do I see that are the top 3 reasons why companies are failing today? Is that the correct question?
Yeah, failing or things that they could be doing that would improve their workflows, finances, and things like that.
Got it. The first thing that I can think of is I'm going to use the word literacy. I think as architects and designers, we are extraordinarily proficient in design literacy. Almost all architects are also like very, very good at being accountable, and we can manage work. So like management literacy, design literacy are really, really, really strong. Where I think everyone continues to be weak, which I think the entire industry has continued to improve over time, is financial literacy. You don't have to be like the smartest person in finances, but literacy is I like this vocabulary because it does start to set the bar that you need to have a certain level of literacy to be a professional in the space. And not enough awareness is brought to that topic. And I think as architects, we don't spend enough time honing in on your financial literacy skill set. So that's one. Number 2, I don't think the industry historically have focused too much on context and specificity outside of design. So
it's interesting. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is like if you ask any architect, do you value your team? And do you value a mentorship program? And do you value the ability to like train the next generation of architects and designers? You will never hear the answer no. Of course. Right? Of course I want, like, that's like if you do ever hear the answer no, like that's a really odd answer. What no one ever talks about is like, okay, like we gotta get specific here. Like, how are you doing that? Is what you're doing enough? Is what you're doing efficient? Does it actually work, whatever you're doing, to like foster the next generation of like future architects and designers? We don't ask enough specificity. The odd thing is whenever I look at this and I compare it to like a design project, it's very different. I can get down to the corner, right? I know that corner detail so well, and I can zoom out to like a site plan and know every corner on a site plan level as well. So like I know specificity and context when I think about design projects. I don't see enough context and specificity when the topic is not a design project.
Right. And there's an interesting component to that because it kind of comes down to taking action, but also having metrics. Like there's a certain amount of measurability that needs to take place in order for you to understand what has happened, especially when you get to a larger size office. Then metrics is huge.
It is huge, but remember, metrics are only metrics. You need to have a very good why and to what end. I think I see a lot of examples where firms jump to metrics and they haven't spent the time of working out why.
Interesting.
And I've also seen a lot of firms that spend a lot of time thinking about the why, but never get down to the metrics.
Interesting. So in the case of the offices who have metrics, are like, can you expand on that? What does that mean exactly?
Who spend a lot of time on metrics, but don't spend enough time on the why.
Yeah.
So like an architectural metric might be like, hey, here's a metric and here's a goal. We have to hit this deadline by the end of the week. We have like a certain level of completion on documents that got to go out by Friday night. So like there's a metric and there's a goal at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
What's not usually clear is, well, why does it have to be Friday?
Sure.
Yeah.
The set of requirements that are outlined, why are they those set of outlines? What is the goal that we're like, why are these decisions made? Why am I told on the week of on a Wednesday? There's a lot more deep dive that usually there's not enough clarity and context when managing a team.
Do you think that the younger generation of offices, younger, I don't know, I guess it means 40 and under for architects, are more likely to take these types of questions and issues regarding the health of the business, let's kind of put it that way. Not specifically the Wednesday to Friday deadlines, but overall like the health of the business financially and tracking of the time and all of these things. Do you think the younger offices are taking it more seriously or more likely to than the older ones? And I ask, it's just hard to speak in generalization, but I ask that because I do perceive a shift with the younger generation of architects, not necessarily for that subject, but for other things like sustainability, social justice. Those are two easy picks, but you talk to any young professional, that's at the top of their mind, right? And the third one is having a workplace culture that is good and not poisonous and toxic. Like these are real things that are happening, I think, with the next generation. And I'm wondering if the correct amount of concern with, again, health of business is also one of those things.
If you're asking if I see it in the trends of like Monograph data, absolutely.
Really?
We see a trend where like the younger firms adopt technology a lot faster. And that's not just Monograph, that's like across the board. It's the younger talent adopts new technology way faster than the older talent that's been in the industry for longer. And that's for probably on a hypothesis, a number of different reasons. But the trend line does show that like if you're younger, you adopt technology faster. Now, does that mean that the younger talent also cares about like the financial stability of a business more? It's hard for me to say. What I do know is like the awareness that it's an important topic is a lot clearer. Is it as important as it is in the past decades? I don't know. Like I don't have that data set in front of me. What I do know is because technology makes it more accessible, it is more accessible.
That's a good point.
Do you see do you see that people are more maybe disciplined in using Monograph like throughout the year equally, or do you see trends where maybe they're like much more disciplined in using it at the end of the year, where they gotta crunch all the numbers, or like right before taxes? I mean, how
So like people,
how good of users and are those offices? No, but
so like on a particular month, everyone's filling out all the timesheets from the last like 3 months at once.
Well, that's not what should happen. But I'm kind of curious if.
Right.
If the other aspect of the finances that are more kind of like, governmental deadlines are what drives the pattern of using the platform or being disciplined versus not.
I see, at least in Monograph, the discipline of our customers is extraordinarily high. And there's not a lot of changes in that discipline across the year.
Okay, good.
I believe the reason why is, well, one, when you do something and you see incredible real-time feedback when you do something, it encourages a rigor and a discipline to set into place that doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think like the value has to be there. If the value isn't there, then there's not enough incentive to drive the rigor and the discipline. And you might see that in other examples in other software where like if the value isn't immediate enough, it's hard to drive discipline. It's hard to drive rigor.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's also about the engagement that the platform offers.
Well, we talked about this, I think, the very first time we had you on the show. Yeah. I think a good part of the conversation had to do with the, I'm trying to remember now, but the point that you had made, which I thought was interesting, was that architects are so well trained in school, and specifically, to take ideas and figure out how to convey them the best way. That's like a huge part of what school is and a huge part of what being an architect is, verbally, but specifically graphically. And I think you kind of extrapolated that and you said, Monograph is trying to take something that would seemingly feel boring and inaccessible and clumsy and make it not that way. Utilizing kind of an architect's, skill set in the early days when Monograph was being developed. And, maybe now it sounds obvious that we've talked about before, but it does make a big difference because you're really talking about user experience at that point.
It does. And I think we're going to continue to prove it as we continue to build. And our stance is visual representation, graphics, like how something looks and how we read information that's in a diagrammatic format is absolutely necessary if you were to build software for this industry, because this is how this industry interprets information. We see the world through diagrams and representation. We do not see the world through numbers. It doesn't mean that there's no value in numbers. It just means that our job here at Monograph is to translate numerically numbers into visual diagrammatic information so that our audience, architects, can find it extraordinarily useful to make decisions. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. There was another question that we had written down, which is a bit, the question is, what is an ideal billing cycle that you think offices should adopt?
As soon as possible.
Okay.
So I think the framework for answering that question is like, first, to understand you're running a business. You cannot run a business if you don't collect payment.
Yeah.
Because then you're not a business. You also want to run a predictable, sustainable, healthy business. The qualifiers for that means that you have some predictability and you have some cadence in terms of like how often you get paid and how regularly you can predict those payments, kind of nailed down. So with all these essentially like your North Star, the answer is you want to get paid ideally every single month. And like I think there was an old framework where you were to build based on like the completion of a phase or of a deliverable. The problem with that is like you don't really control when that phase ends or when that deliverable is actually completed. And since you do not control that, the cadence of your payments is like completely also uncontrollable.
Right.
Like here's the problem. If you build your business that way, you have to ask yourself, do you pay your employees every single month or every 2 weeks? Do you pay your rent every month or every 2 weeks? Do you pay the rest of your expenses? I'm going to imagine that the answer is yes. That those expenses, they're clockwork. They're predictable of when they are due and when they're needed to be collected. And you need to design a business model, from my philosophy, a business model that aligns with the expenditures that have to come in. So since your expenditures are like every 2 weeks or every month, ideally, your billing cycles are also the same. If not, you run a really risky business where like, hey, I have to continue to pay payroll and rent and utilities, but I haven't gotten paid yet by my client. So where does that money come from?
Do you think it's hard though to bill a client every 2 weeks? I mean, the bill will be less than if it's once a month, but it's also more often. So psychologically, is it going to make them feel like they're constantly paying?
Yeah, so maybe 2 weeks is not the right metric. I wouldn't suggest 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks is insane. But I do think 1 month is the right cadence.
Yeah, everything else is on a month.
I mean, yeah.
Your
electricity bill is on a month, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
How different architecture offices bill their clients. And there's only three to my knowledge. There's hourly, percentage of construction, and fixed fee. And they're all super different. All of them have their pros and cons. It's interesting also because in the Bay Area, hourly is the standard. Almost all the architecture offices here bill hourly. Down in Los Angeles, it's way, way more common for the LA guys and gals to bill as a fixed fee, which has its benefits for sure, but is mental also at the same time. Because I'm talking about fixed fee for the whole enchilada. Fixed fee not just for CDs, but fixed fees for design, fixed fees for permitting, fixed fee for CA, which my brain,
just have to ask for like $3 million and then you're covered. You know?
Well, that's the problem when you have a fixed fee. So now we're just talking about how architects bill, but like the psychology of it, right? If you tell a client, my fee is based on a percentage of construction and my fee is 10%, let's say, as an example. Well, 10% is a small sounding number because it's the number 10. But if you extrapolate that and you say 10% of this project is going to equal $785,000, $785,000 is a lot larger than 10, just as a number, and it freaks people out. So therefore, I do find often when the fee structure and proposals are a fixed number, I think a lot of offices end up charging less than they could if they were a percentage or even hourly, because that big number is just too frightening.
Is it frightening?
To some clients, yeah.
So this is where like I would challenge a bit. Like that client has already mentally committed to a $7.8 million project. They have to, because that's where the fee is coming from.
Yeah.
Like you know you're gonna like this is gonna cost you like the whole thing a $7 million project, and our fee is 10% of that 7 million, and it's 700,000. Is that scary? Because if it's scary, then maybe we should not solve the fee problem. We should really solve like how much you're willing to spend on this project, because it's probably not 7 million then.
That's the other problem too. It tends to be that these issues come up more when a client has an unrealistic construction cost expectation, and therefore everything gets thrown out of whack.
Well, but I think again, maybe it goes back to this idea of representing information either with number, words, or graphics, right? As the number, it's scary. But if you make like a pie chart with colors of all the costs that goes into a project, the construction cost, the contractor's profit, the permitting fees, the structural engineer, and the architect, Well, then they realize that the pie size of the architect
That's
is
a good
actually the
idea.
biggest one.
That's a good idea.
And I'm thinking, you know what? Everybody listening to this, like that might be a way to communicate our numbers to them on proposals instead of just using numbers, because
That's interesting.
it's more convincing that way. If I was a client looking at this, I'd be like, yeah, you're right. Most of my money is going to go into what I'm building.
Yeah.
But I kind of need these other guys on that to help me get there.
I'm just this tiny sliver of
Yeah,
pie.
you know.
Because at the end of the day, it's still 10% no matter how you talk about it. It's still 10%. I also like reflecting back when I was an architect, and even now, like I think the most important thing when you meet a new client and you see the fear of a number. I think as an architect, we have a responsibility. Like, I see that you're uncomfortable with the budget. The budget is 10%, but it's only 10% of what you're willing to pay. I think we should take a pause right now and talk about, like, are you prepared to make this type of investment in this work? And we can walk through we can look at a pie chart and walk through like what all the components that go into that total spend. And our fee is only 10%. It will always be 10% of that pie. But let's talk about what the size of the pie is, because like I don't have a degree of confidence that you are fully aware of what this cost is. And you need to be, because like this is your project, and I want you to be successful. I want you to like enjoy the work that's going to come out of this, and I want you to be comfortable with the mortgage or the loan or the expenditure that you're going to incur. Right now, I'm going to base my fee on like the original conversation with $7 million spent on construction. I hope you understand that, because that means our fee is $700,000.
It's pretty typical for people to be afraid of talking about numbers because they're going to put off somebody. But it's kind of, the thing is, when you shy away from talking about the difficult things like numbers or schedule, which is the second thing that always comes up, you're not really, obviously you're not solving the issue, and you're actually just kind of postponing the pain. It's kind of like someone was saying, it's kind of like Novocaine. It doesn't make the pain go away. It just postpones it until it festers and gets worse. So when it comes back up, it just knocks you out. It's the same thing when we talk about numbers and schedules. And unfortunately, there are architecture offices and contractors and et cetera, other professionals who prefer to kind of circumvent that conversation or ignore that conversation to get the projects, and they'd rather, so they can get in, right? Mm-hmm. So they can get in, and they know there's going to be terrible aftermath months or a year down the line, but they're like, I just want to get in, I want to get going, and I'll deal with it when the time comes. Now, the benefit is that architect and that contractor, they get the gig and they get to do a project. The downside is that it's extremely unfair for the client. It's also extremely stressful for the client and everyone else. So I don't know. I don't advocate for architects to ever be deceitful, but I do see it, unfortunately. I mean, honestly, I see it. And it's because we hear clients who talk about it. I'm like, that's not real. Whoever told you that is lying to you. That number, it's a lie. It's not going to happen. It's almost like physically impossible for it to be constructed for that price, or whatever the conversation is, you know.
I also feel like I didn't learn this soon enough, but I feel like when I was a young designer, the fear around talking about money was really only fear that I had, and didn't really ever come from the client. and the way I interpret that now is because, well, like, one, if you are an architect providing services at a certain typology of work that warrants that individual to be a high net worth individual, because it's an expensive project, they are totally comfortable with numbers. They are a high net worth individual that have gotten themselves into a circumstances where they can afford to hire an architect and spend. So like, they have no issues around numbers and money. Like, the issues are actually very a self-reflection on me as an architect. I feel uncomfortable talking about the money, but like, they don't feel uncomfortable at all. Like, they're willing to spend $7 million. Yeah. I don't have $7 million to spend. They are willing to do that. They came to me and hired and are looking to hire me as an architect, um, I my takeaway now is like, which I go back to the very beginning, financial literacy is a topic that all architects have to level up in. Because the clients we serve generally have made the money to spend it, and they don't have a problem talking about the money.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's funny because we were speaking with some interior designer, architect, I don't know, a handful of people, and sometimes those individuals, like everyone has different paths to where before they came to being an architect or a designer, and sometimes those backgrounds, those past lives, had more to do with finance or running a business, more in that kind of space, those spaces, and therefore they have a much higher comfort level when speaking about those things, numbers specifically, and they also understand it better. And when we talk to those individuals, either on the show or outside of the show, and we ask them, what has been their greatest asset, phrased a little less interviewee like, it's always the fact that they have that business background. They're like, it's huge because I can speak to clients directly about these things. And what happens is, it helps the project in all the ways I was describing before. It obviously, the architect or designer is less stressed about talking about it, but it actually instills a much higher level of confidence that the client has with that architect or designer, because they feel like, okay, you understand what you're talking about. You understand the significance of $500,000, $1 million, or $10,000, or whatever it is. I can trust you, versus an architect or designer who, has their tail between their legs when they try to talk about numbers. That doesn't instill confidence. It would make me as a client think, I don't know if I can trust them for a budget of whatever the number is. And the budget also, by the way, is kind of irrelevant, because if you're talking about a $20,000 project, which is micro, and if that's the amount of money that person has to spend, that $20,000 to that client probably feels like $10 million to another client, or even more. So anyway, I completely understand what you're saying and agree with it.
Well, I think it goes back to the, architects not lacking confidence in talking about something they're not a specialist at or like really knowledgeable at. An architect has no problem in, running through a floor plan and explaining every single corner or every single aspect of it, because they're very confident. They worked on it. They know it really well. But if you're asking them to talk about finances,
financial implication,
like they might not feel like they know enough, so they can talk about it very comfortably.
Budgets. Who cares about budgets? Let's make it cool. It's like, how much is this piece of glass going to cost me? Don't worry about it. It's going to be awesome.
I think it's so important to build a common ground for the language that has to be spoken between client and designer and client and architect. If you do not have equal footing in the literacy between the two, that's where a lot of problems starts to arise. Like, either someone get the loss of trust because I can see that you're not as competent in that conversation than I am. Sometimes it can lead to someone taking advantage of someone because there isn't an equal footing. Yeah. So getting to an equal footing is extraordinarily important and should not be devalued. I think for a very long time, this has not been a topic. I'm not suggesting architects should be a financial planner and be extraordinarily so proficient in finances that they can get a job in that field. Mm-hmm. What I am saying is you need to be competent enough and confident enough to at least hold a conversation, so that you're at least equals when you're talking about money. But that does not translate to you have enough skill to be a financial analyst on Wall Street. It does not translate that way.
No, for sure that's the case. I mean, for us, it's the budget is such a huge thing, and it's a difficult conversation at the beginning for most projects, because basically what it is that no one knows how much things are going to cost for many reasons. And for clients, a lot of times they have no idea because this is not their industry. So they a lot of times don't like stating their budget because they're like, I have no idea what I can get for this amount. And I might give you a number that's they're just uncomfortable giving the number because of that. And so there's always this kind of, it's like a chicken or the egg question at the beginning when it comes to budget. Always the case. And it's kind of, it kind of reminds me, have you seen the Spider-Man meme where there's like 3 Spider-Men standing around, they're all pointing at each other? I'm not exactly where that came from, but they're all in Spider-Man costumes. They're each pointing at each other as if to say like, you're the one that's supposed to be doing this thing. No, you're the one. And it's the same thing, but we could do a meme with like architect, client, contractor, and everyone's supposed to state the budget and no one wants to do it because there's nothing drawn yet. And so it's just weird.
Whoever's going to put the number first is going
to be wrong.
It's going to be wrong. So.
But nevertheless, we like really strongly impress on clients. You should have something in mind, and that's where using rough orders of magnitude is super important. You know, you have to start.
Yeah, and I think like the right way to think about problems like this is when you start a project and you have nothing but an idea, is the goal to be right, or is the goal just to like get things started?
Yeah.
And you want to be in, like, let's use like a baseball analogy. You want to be in the ballpark. Ballpark's pretty big, but like you at least want to like somehow define the ballpark, and the goal isn't to be right, because like it's a long journey. Like it's going to take a long time to design what you want, and we're going to like go through that exercise together. And we do not have to be right to help the client feel more comfortable. Like you don't have to be right. What you have to do is actually just be in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Like, are you a client that's willing to spend 100,000, $1 million, 10 million? Those are really different numbers. Like I'm literally adding a zero.
Yeah.
And not every client can afford that range. So like, let's just try to get into the ballpark. Like, which ballpark are we playing in?
Yeah, I love it. That's our approach as well. We try to kind of convey to clients like how rough, how ballpark-ish the first number can be. It just needs to be a ballpark. Sometimes on the magnitude of like 10x, like you said. It's somewhere. Like otherwise, it could be anything. We're floating in space. But if it's 100,000 versus 500 versus a million, like that's enough for me to understand what we're talking about here.
And you're right. It's basically just a starting point, because that number isn't fixed. It's a working number. It's a number in progress, right? Like as you move through the project, that number will get refined. But it's important that everybody at the beginning is comfortable with this guesstimated number, because it's most likely going to be around there.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, go ahead.
I was going to say it's good exercise to let the client know, like, if we're in this ballpark, we can then design a project that's within that ballpark, which means like if we need to be on the upper end, we can, because we are going to design it in that way. And if we need to like value engineer things out, we can also fairly easy do that too, because we're working in the ballpark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other thing that came to mind with this part of the conversation is that I think clients really respond to architects and designers who demonstrate a level of thoroughness and detailedness and attempted precision at the beginning regarding numbers, regarding scope, regarding everything. And so we've seen from our own experiences and anecdotally through other professionals that if you can provide what would be a good example? Like a fairly detailed email, let's say, that describes, okay, well, here are some previous projects and it costs this much for that amount of work. Or if it's an interscope, here's an Excel sheet that says, quote, mid-range, if we do work on this room, it'll cost you this much money, and a breakdown approximately of where that money is going for the furniture items, let's say for the interior thing. When that gets provided to the client at the very beginning, which sounds kind of premature and sounds like you're being too precise and too detailed, but you put a big asterisk saying that this is just a starting point, so you have an understanding. When they see that, that's also a very good way to instill confidence in the client, because they're like, okay, I get this is going to change, but I see kind of like an x-ray vision into how detailed you're going to be and how on top of your shit you're going to be. But I think that's a very powerful tool, let's say. I think, though, to do that, as a professional, you need to be operating that way already. And that gets to, frankly, time tracking. Like you can't give an estimate of your fee if you're going to do a fixed or percentage or whatever, unless you actually have data that you've tracked over the course of a project or a few projects or years or decades or whatever it is. Because if you don't have it, you don't have it.
No, and you can't even use somebody else's data because, each office works differently, approach project and processes differently. So it really has to be your own, your own tracking. I was wondering. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say you just nailed it in terms of why I started Monograph, because like I see so many firms in the past just shooting in the dark, and like, look, you can't even set up. I'll call it a baseline. You don't have one, because like if you don't have the information, then where's that baseline going to come from?
Yeah.
It's a horrible way to run a business, and it also does not instill confidence in yourself, and it does not show when you're talking to clients.
Yeah, it's that last part. All of that's true, but in particular that last part, it's almost a night and day difference. And I will say personally, for us, we have seen, again, the longer we work and the more data that we ourselves collect using Monograph or using other things as well, not just for ours, but other metrics, right? The more of that we can have, the easier it is to know everything, but specifically to be able to predict a fee. Because everyone calls and says, what's your fee? And that's a really difficult question on if you just ask that, you don't understand the scope of the project. But even then, if you know the scope of the project, you can't actually answer that question without some kind of information. So the first is always difficult, but once you get past the first few projects and tracking, then you actually have something real to base it on. And it makes a huge difference when you're talking to someone. Like you said, that confidence and comfort level, just it's there. And it's really hard to fake it.
It's impossible to fake it, right? Because you have to be, you're going to sound really confident when you know. And people know that when you're confident because they can hear it in your voice. And people can also understand that when you're not and you're faking it, because like, hey, like you're not speaking with confidence and you're not sharing any numbers in your dialogue with me. So I have no degree of confidence that you know what the hell you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty hard.
Yeah.
And tracking time isn't really like a way to set up fees per se. Like the way I will like people to think about it is like, hey, you want to track your time so you know how much it costs.
Right.
And there's a different understanding between cost and fees. Like fees need to incorporate your costs plus like whatever margin of error that you want to bake into your fee. But you can never get to a fee if you don't know the baseline of what the cost might be.
You have a question?
Oh, right. Well, I was wondering, as we can see it here in California, and I'm sure elsewhere, the cost of construction is like going kind of like out of control. Let's just put it that way.
It's flattened out, but it's so high. It's so high. We were talking with someone we talked to a lot of people, so now I'm getting confused. We were talking to someone, an architect who's been practicing for a long time, and they were saying, this was like decades ago, like 30 years ago, which is quite some time, that the construction cost per square foot for a nice custom house, like a truly custom house, was like $200 a square foot.
Yeah,
was that what they were saying?
Something like that, yeah.
And I was like, 30 years is a long time, but it's not that long to go from 200 to 1,200.
I mean, even the value of real estate. I was watching something yesterday about this house in LA that was like the most expensive house in like I don't know what year. It cost $1 million, and now it sold recently for like over 10. Yeah. And the realtors were like, "Well, imagine you buy a house now for $1 million. It's gonna be worth $10 million in like so many years." And I'm like, that is ridiculous. Yeah. Kind of like how much the number changed, but. So it also makes me think, if the cost of construction is higher, then does that mean that architects make more money?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. One would think that the cost of construction increases and like the architect should make more money. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to like, is the architect confident enough to articulate to the fees they need to to make it through the current economic conditions. So I want to say yes, but I think there's a lot of caveat given to like, can an architect actually do it? I want to believe so. I'm an optimist. And I think a really intelligent architect will understand that like the construction costs are really, really high. The inflation is currently on the rise. So the cost of things are high. So the cost of my labor also went up.
Sure.
And because of that, now that impacts the fees that I have to write and put out as proposals. So they are correlated, but it does mean that architect needs to have a certain level of financial literacy, and awareness of like the economic environment we are in today.
Now, if the inflation kind of fluctuates throughout the year, let's say like something crazy, right? It goes like really, really high in April and then it drops back down like tremendously in September. Like, should we be adjusting our fees both ways in a way? Like, should our fee fluctuate within the same year? Like, how much do you think there is room here to adjust?
I'm a strong believer that like it's really hard to predict the future. And you can only react to like, you can only make the decision to either react or not react to the current market conditions.
Right.
So if you believe that it's going to go up really, really fast and it's also going to come down really fast too at some point, and you believe that, then it might not make sense for you to change your fees back and forth.
Yeah.
If you don't believe that and you have a belief that the inflation is going to rise and we're going to set the bar at a different level going forward, then it's probably important to raise the fees. So I think it does come down at a certain point where like you have to make your best call. Mm-hmm. It's your business.
We have a dentist who I think he never really changed the price of his dental cleaning for many, many years. And, it used to be like, I don't know, like $100 or something forever, right? And like just a few months ago, I think one of his employees was like, hey, you know what? You're kind of the cheapest guy on the block for cleaning when everybody is jacking up their price. So maybe you should. So, they doubled it, which is still cheaper than some other places, but
a 100% increase.
But he made me think, well, that's a problem, right? It made me think how many architects out there never increase their rate. And when they do, how many do, 10 years later because they've never done it. And now it's like twice the price.
Based on what I know here at Monograph, like too many of our customers do not ever change their rates.
Yeah.
And that's a very bad behavior. I personally believe you should increase your rates annually based on inflation.
It makes total sense. We work with a lot of different professionals and we see their contracts and things. And one of them in mind that I'm thinking of, they have a rate chart, sheet, and every year it changes, and it's very, very precise. It's not, oh, our rate is $100 flat. It's like $110.57 or something. It's maybe a little bit extreme, but it's like super precise. And every year it goes up by some odd number. And there's a psychology of odd numbers, which we could talk about, I suppose. But it's to do with inflation and other things. And it's evidence, or at least it appears to be evidence, that their increase in their hourly rates is not an arbitrary thing from 100 now 200, which again, like, okay, why is it precisely double? In their case, you look at it and you think this is because of inflation. This is because of some other math that they're doing, behind the scenes. And again, on the psychology aspect of it, from a client's perspective, it's kind of like, I'm not going to question it because clearly they've done some thinking behind it.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of architects fail to understand is when you make the conscious decision to start a practice. So I'm speaking specifically to architects that own they're owners. They own a business. Nothing is arbitrary. You're running a business. Like you should have sound arguments and logics in how you make decisions to run your business. And that goes all the way down to like, well, why is your fee this number? Well, there's a logic behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you growing at this pace? There should be a logic around that. It's no different than when we started earlier this conversation with like, hey, if you value being a mentor, have some logic and like rigor around, well, what does that really mean? What are you gonna do? How are you actually gonna put to work to level up the future talent of future architects? There are no ambiguities there. Like there's a reason, a logic, and why you did it. No different if you were creating a design project. You might look at it and like, look, there's no logic to that. It's like, no, I can make sound arguments and why the design decisions that I've chosen to make are presented in front of you. You should take the same rigor and apply it to your business.
It's such a funny thing because you went through architecture school, so you know this, but when you started in year one, presuming you've never worked in an architecture office or didn't have extensive background in architecture before then, you learn these things that you're describing. And it's like the most weird, abstract thing to learn, how to take raw space, a blank piece of paper that has a site on it, and create something with program. And the thinking is really it requires a lot of mental dexterity, an extreme amount. And to weave it all together, create the thing, draw it up, pitch it, present it, explain it, the rationale behind it, as you just said. You learn all of that. And again, I believe it's like very complex to do. It's very difficult to learn. It's painful. And we get into the profession, and that becomes the easy part. And everything else becomes the hard part, which is so dumb because like, architecture school was painful. It's hard, and it still is hard to produce a good design, I think. But at the same time, that is the easy part and the fun part compared to being as high operating and thinking through all the topics that you're talking about.
It's really funny that it happens that way, and I think what I would love for the audience to hear and take away is it doesn't have to be. It does not. Like, it's the way you think critically does not have to change. So like, let's take a very example of like a first year project. I think we've all done this where like you get presented a site, there's a view that's off to the corner that you really want to design for, and you kind of like design the whole building, the whole project to kind of like gravitate towards that view. And you design your circulation patterns that way, you design everything towards that one approach. And it's fairly, it's a first year type of project. But it's based on logic, and it's based on like a story that you're designing this project around. When you're designing your business, it's no different. Like, show the same rigor that like you have a formed opinion, you have a perspective, and you need to make then decisions that align to that formed opinion. Some of the best firms that we all look up to have a really strong opinion. They've essentially built their entire practice around that one opinion. We can argue all day if that opinion is a good opinion or not. But what's really evident is that they've built their practice around it. And everything kind of like aligns, and there's no ambiguity in the decisions that they're going to make throughout their business.
Yeah, that's a great final point, because I do think that it's very easy for architects to forget that the very successful architects and offices have spent an immense amount of time thinking about that, about the business being in alignment with the architecture, and the business being thorough, and all the things that we've mentioned, maybe even more so. And it's easy for us, for architects, to forget that or not see it, because of course we care about the architecture. We don't think about all of the other business, marketing, financial, et cetera, decisions that have had to have been made in order for you even to hear about this project. Because, I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of really good architecture that exists and is being created. You don't necessarily hear about it because a lot of times I feel that the architects who created those and the businesses who created those works are not putting as much time and effort into the business itself as some of the big names. It's not always the case, but I think that's definitely a factor.
Oh, definitely. I think there's an incredible amount of great talent talented practices out there that don't spend enough of their time sharing the success of their projects.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't serve the profession, right? It does not serve the business. And I think owners who do incredible work have a responsibility to also share that they did incredible work.
Yeah.
One can also argue, did the incredible work ever occur if they don't do that?
What is it? If a tree falls in the forest, no one's around, does it make a sound? Kind of deal.
Yeah. Did the tree ever fall?
Yeah.
Right. Like, so it's in that there's a lot of deep meaning that can be derived from there. Because like, well, first, like the tree still has to fall, and that's just doing the work. Or like you still, if you're the guy that's like, or gal that's chopping the tree down, you still have to do that. The tree still has to come down. But if no one heard that the tree come down, like did the tree actually come down? Because like that means the work didn't actually end. Like there's still more work to do.
Right. Much to think about and much to do. Robert, thanks for coming on the show as usual. A very interesting conversation. Again, as usual. This was a lot of fun, and thanks for making the time on what are we, Friday?
Oh, gosh.
I was going to say it's Tuesday.
It is.
What difference does it make to us?
Did you fill out your timesheet, David,
the people
today?
who work 7 days a week, it might as well be a Monday for all I care. Well. Let's get back to work.
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.